You could forget everything else we've said in this video, but as long as you follow this one tip, you will make a great smartphone movie. And that is, keep it simple. Simplify your story, simplify the props, simplify the characters, the dialogue, all of it. The more simple you have it, the more that you're going to be able to play, and the more that your limitations filming on a phone will not show and be a distraction from the movie itself that you're making.
Hello everyone, I'm Ethan, the director of House.
Hi, I'm Jordan. I helped on House.
This is just a behind the scenes video. We're going to kind of talk about the process of making that movie, but more specifically, we want to focus on just what it looks like to shoot a movie using a cell phone as your camera, or a smartphone, I guess I should say, as your camera. Yeah, so that's what we're going to talk about today. I had been working on projects earlier that year by myself, and I was never happy with them because I put too much emphasis on the look of my movie. I'm someone who really likes to shoot nice looking things. I want them to look cinematic. I want them to look cool. And so I put a lot of time focusing on that and less time focused on the story elements of my movie. And I could feel that that was always a hindrance. And so I was frustrated and I wasn't sure what to do. And instead of giving up and scrapping all of it, I instead scrapped all of it and worked on putting together a different kind of story. And my focus was also going to be on just the fact that I was going to make the look of the movie on a technical level just not the priority. So the easiest way I could think of doing that was by shooting it on a phone.
Well, you shot, how many scenes did you shoot of the other project?
22 minutes.
22 minutes. And it was good looking stuff.
Yeah.
Like it all looked great. It was all well lit and everything. So it was a good looking movie. And then when I saw the phone footage, because you texted me, or you sent me the phone footage,
Yeah.
it still looked really good. Just the image quality wasn't like,
Yeah.
you can't compare a phone to a really nice camera.
Yeah.
That's just, you just can't. But what you were able to do was just use all the lighting stuff and composition to, I don't know, make it more interesting, I think.
Mm-hmm. And the focus also, like, I felt like I wanted to get away from having to worry and think about that kind of stuff. And even if I was shooting on like a mirrorless camera, like what we're recording with now, like even if I had that on set and no lights and I wasn't worrying, and if I'd shot the movie just on that instead of the phone, I automatically felt like I would have put that pressure on myself that much more. And I was really trying to get away from that pressure on a technical level. So I could focus on just the movie and the emotion and what it does, I don't know, what that movie feels like and stuff. So that kind of drove the decision, and I think that worked out for me on this one.
Well, the phone's mostly automatic.
Exactly.
Like even if you had that camera, you still, and you were just going to film whatever, no lighting, you still have to set the exposure, the aperture, ISO. You
focus,
you
right?
still get, you have to set all that on a phone. You just press a button, that's it.
Yeah.
And it does all that for you.
Yeah.
Not that you shouldn't learn how to do all that other stuff, but if you just want to focus on the story and just like not have to worry about it looking perfect, a phone's a nice way to go because it makes a lot of those choices for you.
Yeah. And that was probably one of the most freeing parts because it was shot in a way that I was really moving around a lot. I had a very limited amount of time, so I didn't want to waste extra time focusing on changing exposure and all this. So the fact that I could get a shot and be like, oh, I want to get this right now real quick while I was still kind of in the moment, I could just move the camera really quick, reposition really fast, and just get it and know that it was going to look more or less the same. And the phone was just taking care of that for me. So it was a really freeing process. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, I think it was really great. So in all of that, obviously when you're shooting with a phone, you're not using a lot of equipment. That was kind of the approach that I went in with. So I'm just going to talk about what I used and why I chose not to use some things that I almost incorporated as well. So I was originally shooting with just a Google Pixel 4, just in the standard app. I didn't use like any third-party video app, so I shot it at 30 frames a second because Pixel only shoots at 30 or 60. And so I was using that. I had a Rode Wireless Go Lav kit that I had gotten like an adapter to so I could have wireless audio into the phone. And I hated that. It was just a horrible process.
Do not buy that equipment.
No, I love that mic for these cameras, but for the phone, it always blew out. It was always too loud.
Go out, buy that equipment. I changed my mind.
And so I was like, well, maybe I'll use a Zoom recorder because, I can control it here and I'll just sync everything up later. But I hate syncing audio. It's the worst thing, especially syncing a lot of it. And so I just made dialogue not a priority in the story, where you didn't need to hear what I was saying for it to come across for the most part. And if I really need you to hear it, what's great, phones, they're meant to pick up voice. That's like their whole point. So they're usually pretty good at isolating a voice. So usually it comes out clear enough. In terms of lighting, I had a lighter on set, and I had three or four
Candles.
little battery operated candles. They weren't even real candles.
Yeah.
And that was it. Because I really didn't want to cheapen the look of how dark it was. Because a lot of movies, they'll film it in the dark,
Yeah.
but you can see everything.
Yeah.
Or you can see a lot of the environment. And I wanted to make sure that the dark was dark. So yeah, I didn't use any other lights. Although at the beginning, I did try and use a light. I wanted to have like a blue light on in the background, just to kind of, again, brighten things up. But after like 2 scenes of that, I strayed away from it because it wasn't helping.
You lost a lot of the pure kind of dark kind of values in there.
Exactly.
And it made it feel more open, whereas with just the lighter, it felt a lot more kind of claustrophobic and dark. And going back to the audio really quick too, sound is half of what a movie is. So you can choose to record sound and make it all perfect. But again, if you're just shooting on an iPhone or a smartphone or whatever, the picture is not going to be of the highest quality. Audio doesn't need to be of that high quality, especially for the kind of stuff you were doing, because a lot of it was just room tone.
Yeah.
And any sounds that you wanted to add in to add like atmosphere, you didn't need to, like you're gonna add in post anyway.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't make sense to record nice clean audio from a mic and then kind of distort it to make it sound like room tone or change or anything. It's just an extra process that you don't need to do if you're doing smartphone filmmaking.
Yeah.
Kind of like this.
Yeah. And if you were doing it where audio was a big focus, I would honestly just recommend you pick up, however, like if you have 2 actors on scene, you just get one of these little things. And I'm sure you can get splitters to have 2 lav mics going into it for the left and right channel, and that's how you record your audio. Or you can have, I think it's easier to have it going to an external source regardless, as opposed to going into the phone. But I think the biggest takeaway is just play to a couple of strengths, and all the weaknesses, you just kind of minimize those as much as possible. Like I knew that getting audio was going to be a pain in the butt, like if I was doing it on set. So I made sure that the movie didn't hinge on the audio, and the audio that did matter, I was going to be adding in post anyways. So I'd make sure it was high quality and sounded good. And then also I had a tripod, and I had a phone mount, just a simple like battery like extender mount too, because Pixels don't have long battery lives. So it just had like a wireless charging, set up on the back, so it would keep my battery going a little longer. But that's all I really used. It was really simple, really easy. The most important thing, actually, I totally forgot. I used Moment lenses as well. Those are little cell phone lenses that you can add onto your phone that will give you like wider shots or telephoto shots. So I'd use the ultra wide lens sometimes to get bigger environments, but also sometimes I would shoot it just normally, and I would crop out like the background. I'd scale the image down and just put it in more blackness to make it look like I was shooting really wide. Or I would just use the 18 millimeter wide lens. And then the telephoto I use actually mostly for close-ups. I found that if you bring the phone just closer to your face, it kind of distorts it in a weird way. But if you use the telephoto lens, it just looks a little better for getting those really tight shots. So that's how I would use the telephoto lens most of the time. Especially with phones nowadays where you have multiple lenses built in, it's less of an issue. I mean, still your standard lens, like your main focal length on your phone, that one's usually the highest quality in terms of it's the most wide aperture, so you're getting the most light through it. It's usually the sharpest, usually has the best like sensor behind it. So focusing on that lens was why I did. Because like the Pixel 4 does have two lenses. It has a telephoto and it has a standard lens. But I think that the standard lens just by far produced a better image. So that's why I leaned into that. But again, it doesn't matter as much, that image quality, when you're shooting on a phone. Like I say, if it's between you're worrying about the image quality or you're worrying about the shot, I would worry more about the shot for most of it.
But again, like we've made movies on our phones before where all we had was just this.
Yeah.
And nothing else.
Yeah.
And it still works just fine, just as good. I mean, this is a nice little polish on there.
Yeah.
But you don't really need any of that stuff. But what would be like what would be 3 things you'd recommend people buy if they were to go like this route?
Yeah, I would recommend a tripod. I think that having steady shots for me is really nice. I know Jordan doesn't always agree with that. He's a fan of handheld. I really like to have steady shots. But if you're shooting by yourself especially, I mean, then there's no one to hold your phone, so you have to put it somewhere. So having that is great. I do think having, for most people, at least an external audio recorder like a Zoom H1N, or just so you can have clean audio to have recorded. Because I have a feeling most people, when you're shooting a movie, you're going to be shooting it probably less abstractly than House was shot. So I recommend that audio is the most important half. It makes up so much of what your piece is, and if you have bad audio, it's really hard to watch your movie. So focus on that first and foremost.
It all depends on your movie that you're making too. With House, you can get away with just recording on your phone with the audio.
Yeah.
With October, not an iPhone or not a smartphone movie, you kind of need that audio. So just regardless, the Zoom recorders are really good for that, for just filmmaking in general.
Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't need to be the nice ones. Like you're saying, like get the cheap one.
Yeah.
Because it does plenty, unless you're really like an audio engineer kind of person and you want that extra reach.
Nerd.
And then I think the third thing, like just a phone mount for your tripod. I mean, maybe that doesn't even count.
Yeah, you kind of need that with the tripod.
Maybe that comes hand in hand with it. So if I were to do one thing on top of that, if you're serious about phone filmmaking, if your phone doesn't already have extra focal lengths, I really do recommend it doesn't have to be Moment because those are pretty expensive in terms of phone accessories, because they're like lenses that are like $120 a piece. I think that House was better because I had those on, because when you're shooting with the same focal length, it does kind of all, even if you're getting closer or further away from a person, it all kind of does start to feel the same. So it just kind of adds that variety. I think it helps. It just kind of adds to the quality in terms of like variety of how the movie feels. Because the feeling you're going to get from a wide lens versus a telephoto lens is just, there's a huge space between those two lenses.
Ethaniel,
That's not my name.
what does a typical shoot look like for phone filmmaking?
Yeah. I would say my shoot was anything other than typical. I shot a half all-nighter and a full all-nighter back to back. So how my process kind of went though is, for my movie, I did not have a script. I had these broad scene outlines where I would write down 3 or 4 things that would happen in each scene. And from there, I would kind of figure out roughly what my shots would be. I would just kind of pick a start and I'd put the camera there. Usually it's wider. And then I would kind of act out parts of it as far as I could. Whether that's the whole scene or just a section of it, I would act out as far as I could go. And then I would kind of move the camera around. If I felt like that was all I needed, then I would move on to the next section. But for the most part, I would then cut into a second shot, and maybe I would feel like, oh, that first bit I don't think would happen. I'm going to cut to this part. I'm kind of editing in my head as I'm going. Mind you, I was restricted in the way that I wanted to shoot the whole movie vertically as opposed to horizontally. So I kind of changed how you shot the movie. Like sometimes it would definitely more helpful because it kind of isolated me in the frame because you would only see my body. You wouldn't see anything past that, but also it made it harder in other ways.
The vertical is a choice. Mm-hmm. Like it was intentionally chosen for this project. Mm-hmm. And I think those challenges were just because you committed to that idea. Mm-hmm. So I think if you're going to go vertical or horizontal, pick your reason and stick with it. Yeah. Or use both. If you've seen our movies, you know that we love using different aspect ratios. Yeah. So we're not opposed to that either. But just have a reason for kind of, if you're going to go vertical or horizontal. I did that wrong. Vertical or horizontal.
Yeah.
Pick your reason.
And House, we originally thought, for House, we originally thought we were going to shoot the second half of the movie horizontally. Like I thought we were going to, play around with that aspect ratio a whole lot more. But just in test shooting kind of for that to see if it felt right, it definitely felt that vertical is how it needed to stay. Because, just that movie, it just became such a core part of the movie's identity that it would have been odd to switch to anything else. But for the third day of shooting, we shot that during the day, and we blacked out all the windows in this room, and that's kind of where we shot. I don't know, what was your kind of feeling on the process? Because I brought you in later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for me, I was like, dang, he really just making all this up on the spot.
I mean, yeah, I was.
No, but it really was. You had a note on your iPad, and it was just maybe like 8 bullet points. And each of those were like events in the stories. And it was kind of like we would just set up the shot, let the shot play out for what felt appropriate, and then within the shot, we'd either know like this will just be the scene, or let's get some more coverage of this, or let's add another scene, because it's really organic the way this kind of filmmaking is, where it's kind of like, I don't know, like Bellatar or slow cinema or like Edward Yang, where it's like you just set up the camera, the scene goes on, and that becomes its own kind of style, and it feels a lot more kind of fly on the wall, kind of a lot more organic. Things can come up, and you just let things play out rather than imposing editing on top of it, which of course we do, or you did, near the end of it, which was kind of the point, was that it would ramp up to that. And in some ways, like, it was more difficult because if we came to like if we had to figure out a story thing, or had like a problem we had to solve, it was like, okay, we have to figure that out right now. No, I mean, it didn't take super long, but it was a thing that you have to figure out right then and there.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's good. I mean, all filmmaking is problem solving in a way.
Yeah. Because it was an intentional choice that we also shot the movie chronologically. Watch Joel Haver, his movie Island is shot very similarly, where he would let the emotions of the movie kind of influence it, and he would kind of follow those little rabbit holes, and all the little things felt really big, and that's definitely where House came from. Was we wanted to take really small moments that on their own don't seem very important, but because of how like big that is in the context of the movie, it feels like this massive like, oh crap moment, like what's going on. So and we just kind of let that keep ramping up throughout the movie till we get to the end, where it's just kind of all this music's coming in, it's chaotic, and for a movie that's mostly silent, like that's just it just really heightens the experience. So that was kind of where having another person on hand was really great too, because a lot of that couldn't have been shot on my own, especially like the sweeping shot of the table and everything. But that's kind of how our days went, where it was kept it very simple in the beginning, so that way we could ramp up into a kind of a bigger ending that just kind of felt so much huger, because again, the beginning of the movie started so small and so simple.
And that's a narrative trick that you can do with anything. Like, if you have a character who is completely silent for an entire movie, and then he speaks, near the end, that has impact. It's kind of like, spoiler alert, that Planet of the Apes movie, the one with James Franco.
Yeah.
When Caesar finally speaks, it's like, what? And it's because he hasn't been speaking before that. Or like Boba Fett. Or Jay and Silent Bob, when Silent Bob speaks. That's a big thing. Or if the whole movie's in black and white, and then you have color at like Schindler's List.
Yeah.
That's a big important thing. So I think in movies we think like we have to put a bunch of stuff in it a lot of times.
Yeah.
But sometimes just stripping everything away, that's totally effective, and that totally works. And it makes when you add, so say you want to have a bunch of props. Oh, this is what we did do on the movie.
Yeah.
You wanted to have a feast.
Yeah.
At the table, but all we had were apples.
Yeah.
So but since there was like no food for the entirety of House, there's like no food that you see at all. Then when you see the apple, that apple feels like this big feast, rather than having, turkey and mashed potato and like having this big elaborate feast. Yeah. The apples were totally effective in that way.
Yeah.
So sometimes rather than being like, oh, I have to get 20 different things, pull everything back and just put 1 or 2 things in the movie, which sounds really vague because that can refer to sound, that can refer to picture, props, speaking, it can refer to anything. But Sometimes the more simple, the better.
Yeah. You shouldn't be shooting a phone movie because you're out there to make the best thing, but I think it's more meant for you to let go of the fact that all filmmakers are buying gear like crazy. It's really going against, the typical YouTube culture, modern day filmmaker culture. If I got to have the best gear, I have the newest gear, I got to have the A7S III, I got to have the R5, I got to have the new Red. It's like, no. I'm going to shoot this on a phone because it's more fun for me as a filmmaker to challenge myself. And also it's less of a burden of everything has to be perfect. Everything's got to look professional. Everything's got to be the cinematic masterpiece. Like everyone's searching how to make a cinematic movie. It's like, no. If you're shooting a movie on a phone, you're doing it because you love filming movies and you have a story to tell that's more important than the technology you're shooting it on. You're not focusing on the gear that they use. So we as filmmakers probably shouldn't focus on the gear that we use nearly as much as it feels like we should. So
I think gear envy is a real problem, or like kind of gear worshiping, because translate this to any other art form. Writers, right? If you're an author, they don't sit around posting pictures of their pens all day. They don't post pictures of here's my laptop, here's my type. I mean, some probably post pictures of their typewriter, but most authors are like, it's not about the gear they're using, and it's about the end result, which is the book or the story or the movie in our case. It's all about the end result, and it's whether that's a movie or a painting or a drawing or story or whatever. Doesn't matter what you're working on, as long as that thing, that art that you're working on, that's at the forefront, and not so much the gear that you're using.
Yeah.
And this allows you to kind of, again, strip away all that kind of nonsense and get right to the movie itself. If you make a movie on a phone, so you focus just on the movie, which is the best way to like make a movie, obviously.
Thank you guys for listening to us ramble about how to make a movie on a phone. If you make movies on phones or you're planning to, send us your work. We want to see what other people are shooting on phones because it's a really cool, like, little microcosm of filmmaking.
If you notice we were more energized during this one, it's because
the coffee's kicking in.
We had rest. When we shot the October behind the scenes, that was the week after, and we were still recovering.
And like just watching the footage of us or thinking about October was just heavy.
That was draining.
Yeah.
This was fun.
This was good. Thanks for watching, guys.
Yeah.